All right, so in this portion, I'd like to speak about how my personal facilitation style and my personal education philosophy ties in with Indigenous ways of knowing and how I would like to facilitate and alter the education and the way that Indigenous ways of knowing are taught through outdoor education at West. So, of course, West Point Grey Academy is located on the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations. And one thing that I'll speak about a little bit later in this video is how I would like to take a little portion of the knowledge from each of these nations and incorporate it into outdoor education and experiential education at West Point Grey Academy. But before I launch into that, I'd just like to share a little bit about my own experience working and teaching with Indigenous peoples from around the world. So the majority of my education comes from my degree, which I took at Wilfrid Laurier University. However, I was located on the Brantford, Ontario campus for Wilfrid Laurier. And at Brantford, it is actually located on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee people of Ontario. And so we learned a lot about the Six Nations, which are the Indigenous group that live on that territory. While I was at Laurier Brantford's campus. And so it was compulsory that we each took a course on learning about Indigenous history as well as ways of knowing incorporated in education. That was kind of my introduction to learning about Indigenous education, health, well-being, etc. And then from there, that stemmed my interest to take more courses on it. I took a few other courses around Indigenous anthropology as well as Indigenous history around the world. Following that, I moved to New Zealand, which was predominantly where I got the majority of my experience around Indigenous First Nation in a practical sense. So when I moved to New Zealand, I was working in a small community called Porirua, which is located just north of Wellington, the capital city of New Zealand. And while I was there, I was working in a predominantly low decile, so low socioeconomic school, but the community around that school was all Pacifica First Nations Islanders or Maori people, which are the traditional people of. So in that role, I was working as a health and phys ed teacher at Aotea College. So a big part of my job there was connecting traditional Pacifica and Maori games as well as cultural activities to the curriculum that we were already teaching. So sports, activities, health and well-being. So there I taught all about the Maori health model, which is called Te Whare Tapu Wha. And essentially, it is quite similar to the Indigenous medicine wheel here in Canada that a lot of Indigenous nations reference in terms of their health and well-being. So how I would bring that to West Point Grey Academy to tie that all back together is that I would like to bring that medicine wheel model to how I approach outdoor education. A huge part of that for me is giving the students experiences in their local area, getting to know where the traditional nations actually come from. So what is their traditional territory, as well as what are some of the traditional practices, cultural activities that are of relevance to these First Nations, and then what are some of the progressive movements that are currently being made by these First Nations communities in the greater Vancouver area. So through my research on the Squamish First Nation and what is most important to them as a nation, a huge theme that came out of it was health and well-being, as well as traditional practices. So a big part of it that I would like to incorporate into our curriculum, if possible, is giving students a chance to actually go to a Squamish First Nation cultural center and engage in some traditional activities if possible. So learning about the salmon run, maybe getting the chance to actually go out on the water, practice some fishing, or at least learn about the traditional ways of catching salmon and how that is connected to the Squamish First Nation. Other activities can include things such as like drying out food for long distance trips, something that the Squamish First Nations people did quite a bit traditionally to travel across their territory. So learning about dehydrating food and speaking to elders at the Squamish First Nation Cultural Center about how it was done traditionally, and also learning about some of those histories so that it is done respectfully. And then turning to the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, so a big focus of theirs and a large theme that is echoed throughout all of these three nations is their commitment to climate change resilience and coming up with a climate action plan for the future. So a lot of energy from the Tsleil-Waututh Nation has gone into combating emissions and also coming up with a plan for renewable energy. So I think something that would be really impactful for an outdoor education course, and it follows in one of my values as well as an outdoor education teacher, is gaining a greater appreciation for the environment and what we actually need to protect as residents on this traditional Tsleil-Waututh Nation territory. So things such as going out and actually going for a hike on traditional territory, getting an appreciation, learning about the trees and the natural world that we have on our doorstep here in Vancouver. Another area that I would love to work on with students in this program would also be reaching out again to a Tsleil-Waututh Nation representative or a leader of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, and having students go and listen to a talk or a presentation around how the Tsleil-Waututh Nation is combating climate change and some of their methods of moving forward as a nation to create a healthier environment. And then finally, to touch on the Musqueam First Nation, a huge portion of their culture, and again, this ties to all three nations, but a big piece of the Musqueam Nation culture often revolves around their artwork and the way that they're able to replicate things in nature through art. And this could be kind of a cross-curriculum type of teaching, but maybe working with the art department to come up with some outdoor pieces that we could create with the help of the Musqueam First Nation. So reaching out, having some representatives first come and teach our students about some of the traditional artwork. And then this could be something that maybe we could create some pieces that are unique to West Point Grey Academy that we could erect on our own campus that would kind of represent the learning that we've done in this course. Again, this would be something you need to be quite delicate with in terms of respecting and not appropriating the Musqueam First Nations culture. However, I think if it was done in partnership with the Musqueam First Nation and was used to raise awareness about their culture and about their community, it could be a really interesting thing to do. We've done something similar here at the school that I currently work for, so Lakefield College School in Ontario, where we have created pieces of artwork from wood and put them up around campus so that when the students are out either cross-country skiing or going for a hike or a walk, they're reminded of those past units where they were working on creating that artwork. And then oftentimes, if they're a new student or somebody who hasn't necessarily learned about the traditional artwork, when they see those pieces out in the woods, they often have questions and want to know where those came from, and kind of it sparks that interest in learning more about Indigenous ways of knowing as well as that specific artwork. So those are just a few of kind of the initiatives that I would like to get up and going if I were to take on this role as the Director of Outdoor Education for West Point Grey Academy. So thank you very much, and I hope this has been helpful in terms of getting a sense of where my head would be at in terms of coming up with new programming. Thank you very much.